Everybody, Akash Inti here with a quick check-in / explanation video around what do biopharma companies do, what are their different functions or departments, why are these important, and we take it from here. So first, what does a biopharma company do? In the last video, in a previous video, I talked about how biopharmaceutical companies develop pharmaceutical products or biotech products to treat some type of disease. What is a pharmaceutical product? This is a small molecule, is how it's conventionally known as in the industry. And what composes a small molecule is really its size. The size of small molecules is I believe on the order of magnitude of, I don't know, it's definitely at least 1/100th of a biologic, usually. So typically low molecular weights of like a couple hundred Daltons, if you're looking at it in terms of molecular weight. If you're looking at it in terms of the size itself, it's usually around 1 nanometer or so. Now, biologics are many, many times bigger, between 10 and 100 or even 1,000 times bigger. So really the scale of these things is very big and small, and it's important to understand this. That's what a biopharmaceutical company does, is they develop some type of drug that someone will take either through ingesting through the mouth, through IV, there's a whole myriad of methods, through like a lotion to be intaken into the body to treat some type of disease. So when we say treat a disease, this could be addressing the symptoms or it could be curative. To date, many drugs are simply they're simply addressing the symptoms of a disease rather than curing it. So, but that's an aside. So this is what biopharmaceutical companies do, is they make some type of drug, biopharmaceutical product for treatment of disease itself. There's different functions to be able to create a drug that's able to be sold on the open market. As we talked about in a prior video, there is the FDA approval process. And so with that, we have clinical trials and to prove that your drug is safe and efficacious. In this regard, there's a whole department that addresses these types of issues. So before I go any further, I'll start breaking out what are the different types of departments within your traditional biopharmaceutical company. What do they do, and why are they important? So we start with the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer. This person is primarily in charge for the whole company itself, making sure that whatever the company says it will do to investors gets done, as well as make sure that they're the public face of the company. They're the ones kind of leading the charge and really laying out the vision for the company. We can revisit the CEO later, but that's a very integral part to any biopharmaceutical company. The next big piece, I'd say, is your scientists. So usually headed under a chief science officer. The science part of the organization really is tasked with doing research and development. So this could be basic research. When I say basic research, I mean it could be understanding about the pathways of a mechanism itself, really uncovering the important pieces to the underlying biology. It could be translational research. So this could be anything from preclinical research of testing in lab rats to testing just in human tissue outside of like ex vivo. It could also be testing in primates or some such thing. That's translational research. So these are usually the big pieces to the scientific part of the organization. What's the importance of this? Well, the importance of it is really to make sure that the underlying biology of the drug itself, or the reason why the drug would work, makes sense. So it's making sure that, okay, the science makes sense, what we're doing, at least from we can hypothesize that it's safe and efficacious, and thus this is what the kind of the function of the science arm is really hammering down any details around the science itself. The next piece we can go into is the clinical. Often the head of this part of the organization is the chief medical officer. So within the chief medical officer, you'll have clinical development, clinical operations. These are probably the two big ones. So Clinical development refers to making sure that the drug is being developed for the clinic itself. So it's one thing to make the drug in and of itself and to be able to like just synthesize it and such, but it's a whole nother thing to think through where is it going to fit in the clinic itself, like where is it going to fit in the treatment paradigm. Oftentimes, this chief medical officer is thinking through some of these issues. Also could be including communicating to doctors. What does this drug do? Why is it important? Where would it fall into in the treatment paradigm? Treatment paradigm being like, here's the layout of all of the, let's say you have a disease. This is the drug that you take when you are at this stage of the disease. And as you continue and you progress throughout the disease, you have different branches to it. And so you kind of fall into different areas as to, oh, well, now I'm a stage 2 cancer patient, for example. So I take very different treatments than someone who was just diagnosed with cancer. So it's, as you go through the journey of some type of disease, it breaks out different ways. So that talks a bit about the clinical development. To get into clinical operations is really making sure, so when you recruit for a clinical trial, you usually have multiple sites, clinical trial sites. So that means you're in multiple hospitals where you're asking patients to try out your drug. Clinical operations largely make sure that this is all coordinated and making sure that the same drug that's going from going to hospital A is going to hospital B, getting all of the data and doing all of the synthesis of all of this data kind of usually happens in this type of group as well. So clinical development, clinical operations. Why are they important? It's making sure that these types of drugs are getting to the patient that they need for these clinical trials. It's also making sure to manage this person is usually in charge of managing and ensuring that anything that any issues that are arising in the clinic, whether it be adverse events, so maybe someone gets really, really sick as a result of the drug, chief medical officer is the one thinking through all of these things and helping address it to the rest of the C-suite. They're also largely interfacing with the FDA as well. So the clinical part and the regulatory part, which is our next one, go hand in hand. So next piece to this organization is regulatory, often headed by the chief regulatory officer. Regulatory refers to really anything that has interfacing with the FDA itself. So this could be putting together your IND, as we talked about in the last lecture itself. It could be putting together your phase 1, your phase 2, your phase 3, any interactions with the FDA itself. So if the FDA comes back and says, well, we saw that there was something going on in your trial and we are not sure what's going on here. It seems like there's patients dying, for example. The regulatory team would be the ones who interact and interface with the FDA itself. Whether they go down to Washington, D.C. and speak to them in person or get on the phone with them or teleconference, what have you. Regulatory is largely the ones in charge of this. And there's different functions depending on where the lead asset or the drug is in development. Like if it's in phase 3, chief regulatory officer is going to be doing a lot more paperwork than if it's in the preclinical setting. So this is a third big piece, I guess, to a biopharma company. Moving forward, we look at the commercial or business arm. Business development, commercial development, corporate development. We all kind of lump it into this one, often headed by the chief business officer. So who is the chief business officer? This person is largely in charge of making sure that the commercial application of the drug is relevant and there's like a commercial market to it. So this could be anything from marketing, making sure that the drug is actually marketed and sold, marketing and sales. Business development, making sure that maybe our company can't do this alone. We need maybe money or we need some type of outside expertise. Business development is the group that helps ensure that there's partnerships that enable this drug to continue forward. It could be also the commercial is thinking through what is the potential forecast for this drug? Is there a real business scenario for this? And if so, what are the things that we need to be thinking through for the business scenario itself? So market access has been a really, really big hot button issue in years past. So market access may fall under here, and market access being making sure that patients are actually able to get access and treatment to the drug itself. So these are a couple things that kind of would fall under the chief business officer's purview. This person, why is this whole department important? It makes sure that there is a business case for this drug in this particular indication. They're also thinking through who are competitors out there and who should we be on the lookout for. So that talks about that. We also have, so next department is finance, often headed by the chief financial officer or CFO. This person's responsibility is really to make sure that money flowing in and money flowing out is accounted for and tracked for. Oftentimes they are also tasked with pulling together any financing strategy or definitely helping along in the financing strategy, particularly for early stage companies. As these types of companies are really, as much as they're pushing forward with their drug and such, they're still thinking, they must be thinking through, do we have enough money to spend to be able to get done what we had promised? Finance officer also, like I mentioned earlier, making sure that budgets are properly accounted for, any fundraising activity that needs to get done, or any paperwork with fundraising authorities, whether it be the SEC or investors, is gathered and administrated out. So that's largely CFO. Thinking through, I mean, different companies have different structures to it. So one of the big things that I've learned throughout my time, the 3 years or so, 3 to 5 years in the industry, is that you go to 3 different organizations and they have 3 different structures. So these, I guess the last piece before I end here is manufacturing, oftentimes run by a chief manufacturing officer or chief operations officer. Really, the purpose of this is making sure that the drug is being manufactured properly. So this is making sure that it's in alignment with CMC or good manufacturing practices, GMP, sorry. Making sure that the batches are consistent and that there's quality within them, making sure that all of the equipment necessary for manufacturing itself is properly cleaned, is properly maintained, etc. Purchasing new manufacturing equipment, making sure lab supplies are all in good order and such, really for, again, making commercial quantities of XYZ drugs. So purpose of this, the manufacturing officer, is really making sure that we said we were going to make this amount of drug, we're making it. So those are a few of the different branches, if you will, to a traditional or typical biopharmaceutical company. In this scenario, I'm really talking about a therapeutics company. One could be talking about diagnostics companies are a bit different. Digital health companies are a bit different, but I'm really here talking about kind of a traditional biopharmaceutical company. Pharma usually has these broken out a lot more and segmented a lot more. But biotech usually has the opposite, and it has combinations of some of these different pieces, and they'll kind of mishmash together. So I hope this was helpful to you guys in terms of getting a better understanding of what constitutes a traditional biopharmaceutical company, what are the different functions to it, and why is this important. So again, in summary, we have the CEO kind of administrating and making sure that all of these different departments are getting their work done, interfacing with investors, leading the company forward, creating a vision, and making sure that whatever was promised continues to get done. You have a chief science officer. This person is largely, again, responsible for making sure that the basic science makes sense and that the underlying biology is there in order for this drug to continue through development. Then we go into our clinical, our chief medical officer, making sure that anything that's done relevance to clinical development is taken care of, whether it be clinical operations, making sure that all the trial sites are in order, reading through the data itself and summarizing and pulling all of the data together, as well as making sure that the drug is actually developing properly and the appropriate endpoints are selected for the drug. That's your medical officer. We have our chief business officer, business development, strategy, market access, marketing, sales, this kind of arm. Commercial officer, this person, again, is responsible for making sure that the business case for the drug actually makes sense. So that, in other words, the company isn't investing more into the drug than the drug is actually going to be worth. This is largely what the role of that commercial officer is, as well as making sure that there is a market for the drug, and that and to maximize sales itself. So that's your commercial officer. We talked a bit about our chief financial officer, again, making sure that the finances are in place, working with the CEO to ensure that that funds necessary to be raised are appropriately raised, whether it be through private investors, public investors, you name it. Also helping to articulate some of the strategy in the sense of how is this money being spent? Is it being spent and allocated most effectively? So that's your chief financial officer. And then lastly, we talk about our chief manufacturing officer or our chief operations officer. So again, this person really making sure that here's our product itself. We're making sure that we can make our product and actually make it in batches that are bigger than a little sample size. When scaling up, manufacturing oftentimes is a bit more complex than making a small quantity of something. It's like the good comparison. It's really easy to make a small box of mac and cheese. It's a lot tougher to make a huge vat of mac and cheese in terms of proportions, getting all of the ingredients properly, and making sure that all of the different pieces to it kind of come together. So this is Biopharma 101 with Akash Inti. I hope you guys found this enjoyable. I hope you guys found it insightful. Leave a comment, a like, a subscribe if you guys want to hear more content about what is biopharmaceuticals, why are they important, and if you have any particular questions, more than happy to reach out. As you guys know, I've been working in the industry for 3 to 5 years now, in a variety of roles, from consulting, strategy consulting, to investment banking, to working at a tech transfer office, to a market research agency, to the US Senate, to working in the lab itself. So I've had a myriad of experiences, and in a startup as well. So I've had a myriad of experiences, and I'd love to share these with you all so that you guys might learn a bit more as to how biopharmaceuticals work, and if you're interested, how to even enter the industry itself. This is what I have for you guys. Until next time. Ed.